Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Welcome back. Welcome to season 2 of the podcast. I am incredibly thrilled that you are here. You have probably already noticed that my voice is not at its finest. However, the season of life calls for me to surrender any desire for perfection. And I've been so eager to get these conversations into your ears, your head, your heart. So without further delay, I would love to introduce our first guest. Raghunath Cappo is a masterful yoga teacher, Bhakti Yoga devotee, punk rock icon, and a father of 5. He lives in upstate New York on his SuperSoul farm, where he hosts teacher trainings and seva immersions. In his early years, as a teenager in search for depth and meaning, he fled his suburban life and went to New York City and found his people, his community. He started a band and a record label, and wild success followed. By the late 1980s, his band, Youth of Today, had thousands of fans, cementing Raghunath, or Ray, as he was known at the time, as a leading voice and trendsetter at the center of this hardcore punk rock culture. Naturally, an existential desire led him to call it quits in his early 20s. He walked away from this life and headed to India on a spiritual pilgrimage that ultimately led him to the holy village of Vrindavan. During this time, he fell in love with the wisdom, the insight, and the traditions of Bhakti Yoga. He remained there for 6 years, living as a monk. Hence, this is when Ray became Raghunath. Inevitably, returning back to the US, he has pursued a life of sharing the teachings of yoga, taking groups on incredible pilgrimages or Yatras within and across India every year. He also facilitates exceptional yoga teacher trainings within India. And Raghunath also co-hosts the Wisdom of the Sages podcast, which delves deep into the Bhakti Yoga teachings from the Srimad Bhagavatam text. Highly recommended. Let's dive in. Welcome, Raghunath. It's such a gift to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you. Great to see you.
Yeah, and you. It's been a long time. And I know a little bit about your incredible story of life thus far, and I truly believe it is worthy of a biography, which I think I listened on a podcast recently or read somewhere.
2024.
It's happening?
Coming out.
Okay.
Spring 2024. It's being published now.
Brilliant. Because that was, as I was preparing for interviewing you, that was what landed for me. I was like, this man needs to write a book. But look, for those that don't
There's
know
a film that's
you,
actually coming out too. We just went to the premiere of this film. Yeah. It's sort of it's mainly about me and music, but also other people on their journey, because I take people to India, and usually people go to India, they themselves are on their own journey. And when you read someone else's pilgrimage story, you sort of find your own pilgrimage in there. You don't find your own story within their story. So there's a film called Something Divine, which is a quote I always say, not the body, not the mind, we're something divine. So a student of mine who's a filmmaker made this really cool film, and he just did a private premiere for all of a bunch of students up here, and it was beautiful. And I'll keep you posted on what happens with that. It's not out yet.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds incredible. Well, for the listener that doesn't know anything about you, I know this is a really big ask in such a short window of time, but can you take us through a little bit of your journey, like those pivotal moments, those highlights that have brought you to the work that you're doing today?
Sure, thank you. A young guy in a suburban high school in Connecticut, wanted to be different than everybody else, had older brothers and sisters that lived in New York City, so I escape on weekends and go to New York City, and hardcore music. And it sort of inspired me in a do-it-yourself ethos, where I started my own band, started my own record company, and, started touring and putting out our own records and signing all my friends' bands. And our message was sort of simple. It was clean living, positive living, vegetarianism, animal rights. And at that time, things like vegetarianism really wasn't spoken about. What to speak of the punk scene, it really wasn't spoken about. Moby just came out with a movie, and I'm featured in it, called the Vegan Punk Rock Movie. It's available just on YouTube if you YouTube search that. But it's about how veganism and animal rights, how it's all was peppered through the entire punk scene. But we were also in the midst of a crazy druggy scene, real sort of like a dark feeling and violent in New York City. And we were young teenagers. We decided, we like this music, but we're going to flip the script on the ideas behind it. So we were really into no drinking, no smoking, no intoxicants, and animal rights. And that became sort of a theme of our band. And we felt like, okay, we're not so smart. We're young kids, but you know what? This is a good thing. We want to do something good for the world. And this is the best rebellion you can do, is start to learn how to control your senses and control your mind and control your appetites, etc. And we were inspired, and it ended up inspiring like tens of thousands of followers in the mid to late 80s. And that band was called Youth of Today. And then simultaneously, my father had gone into a coma. He'd gotten sick, went into a coma. It shook up my entire family, and it shook me up. And I was a little bit checked out, and I was very checked into my own teenage life. I didn't know what to do. On my journey within my band, I started to get deeper and deeper into my spiritual life. And I wanted my spiritual life to be a little a broader understanding of spirituality. I talk about this in the book, because I went to 1 year of college, of university. I don't know why I went. I guess because you're just supposed to. It's assumed you're supposed to go. But it was in that year I was thinking, what do I want to do? I just want to do music. I just want to write songs. I feel like we have a powerful message. It should be spread. And, university is notorious for a completely degraded life, which I wasn't into. I was into clean living. So I was thinking, what am I going to do? I don't want to end up like one of these frat boy parties, keg parties. I don't want to be that guy. So I thought, what? I like spiritual things. I'm going to find a spiritual group to join. So I joined a Christian group. I felt like these guys are nice people. We would go to hospitals when people were sick. We'd sing we'd sing Christmas carols in the hospital to sick people. The only thing I didn't do is they would distribute meat to the homeless. And I would be like, well, why would I distribute meat? That's not, I'm going to kill an animal so I can, save somebody, a human. There's got to be a better way to do this. So I just didn't do that part, but I appreciated the people. It was a positive alternative. It was like a little bit of oasis in the university. And then on one of my trips to New York City, because I'd go to New York on a regular basis, I'd always explore bookstores that had books on yoga and everything, anthroposophy, theosophy, mystic Christianity, paganism, witchcraft, UFOs, just stuff that I thought was, Buddhism. So there's one time I found an interesting book on Buddhism called the Dhammapada, which comes from the Sanskrit word Dharmapada, from the feet of Dharma. And I thought, wow, this book is so great. It's so concise. This Buddhist teachings is so powerful. Be compassionate, see good in everyone, learn to be tolerant. I was thinking to myself, wait till my Christian friends hear about this. They're going to love this book. And I remember going back to New Haven and sitting in my circle, and everybody gives a share about what they're into and how their week was, almost like a 12-step group. You're sort of sitting around just sharing. And so I was saying, I was really excited, everybody. I went to New York City and I got this great book. It's like completely parallel to the Old Testament. And I really think you guys would like it. And guess what? they didn't like it one bit. They were like repulsed by it, and they shut me down real quick, and I couldn't understand. And I felt like, well, I don't understand. But if they're teaching the same thing with just a different master, what's the difference? And it was at that time that I learned some Christians are exclusivists, meaning their way is the absolute only way. And to me, when I read the New Testament, I never looked at the Bible like that. I always felt like here is a person who is empowered, giving God, giving spirituality. And I find that, hey, these things have more in common than they have differences. Why not see what they have in common? Why not find people's commonality? And it seems like we are black belts in finding the difference in people. And we are white belts when it comes to finding commonality. And it causes so much hate. We live in an incredibly hateful world right now, where families are turning against families and states against states and brothers against sisters, all because we're seeing the difference. And so there is some common threads that we should look for. And that was my first hint of it right there. What do all these spiritual teachings have in common? And that was a burning question in my heart. Now, the interesting thing about yoga philosophy and yoga culture is that all the scriptures are based on it. It's an inclusive understanding of spirituality. Just like this word in Sanskrit, Brahman, which comes from Bri, which comes from the word where we get the English word brilliant. It means where there's light, right? So everything is light in the spiritual realm. And then we are part of that light. And that light impregnates matter. And I can't convert you to being spirit. You are spirit. It's not a conversion process. It's yoga is a remembering process of what we already are. Whether you use a Muslim path, an Islamic path, or a Christian path, or a Jewish path to remember, that's okay. The Vedas teach like that. That's fine. Whatever it is that you remember, that ultimately you're a spiritual being. In a Vedic paradigm, the bio for everybody is, I'm a spiritual being. That's it. That's your bio. I'm a spiritual being, and I'm somehow fumbling around in the material world. I'm trying to reach for truth, getting it wherever I can, and trying to apply it to my life. And this concept of I am spirit is not bound by time. It's not bound by time. It's not bound by any secondary identity. We have a secondary identities, which is I'm a man. I am a straight white male. That's a secondary identity because that can change. It's changeable in this life. It's definitely changeable in the next life. But in this life, you can say, well, I'm not a straight male anymore, right? Or it's not dependent on your gender or your gender preference or your politics. Those things can also change. The only thing that is the same and that can also tie us all together. We use this word a lot, like inclusivity, diversity and inclusivity. We want true inclusivity. And true inclusivity means you love even the people that hate your guts. That's true inclusivity. The way they use it now is like, we want to be inclusive. Well, I don't agree with what you're saying. All right, then you're dead to us. That's crazy talk. And so it's not inclusive. It's inclusive if everyone opts into being what you want them to be. We want to be inclusive in the sense like, I want to see spirit in everyone, in every being, whether they're male or female or black or white or straight or trans or gay or plant or animal or planet. I want to be that exclusive. There's spirit in planet. There's spirit in the trees. There's spirits. All you got to do is sit with your plants. Sit with the tree. If it's growing, that means it's a spiritual being. If it's growing, you know what that means? Every blade of grass is a spirit soul. And therefore, real inclusivity means it's not just the humans that are the citizens under divinity. It's every living entity is a citizen, right down to the planet itself. Real environmentalism is understanding that we're all interconnected and that we're all coming from a higher source. That's when you can make peace with yourself, make peace with the universe, make peace with the earth. And until we understand that, there'll always be this concept of me first, my people first, my family first, my nation first. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And society, I think, drives that at the moment more than ever before, I think.
Yeah.
Even in the yoga community, there's so much division.
Driving us into tribes.
Yeah.
No, we say it's okay to be different. Everyone's different, and that's interesting. That's why I like to go to New York City occasionally. I don't live there anymore, but I lived there for years. I like to go there because it's diverse, and you can say, "Oh, I want Thai food tonight. Oh, I want Chinese food tomorrow, and I want Italian food the next day." There is a beauty in diversity. At the same time, so we don't want to whitewash diversity and get rid of it and say, we're all just the same. We're not all the same. We're all different. But there is a thread that ties us all together. Even the person you're at war with, there's something very, very connected. I won't say human because it's not a human thing, because you can look a dog in the eyes too and have that same connection. There is something that ties us all together, and that's the fact that we're all spiritual beings embodied.
Can I ask you? No, go ahead.
I was just saying, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I believe. When I heard the Vedic paradigm of reality, truth, illusion, I was like, yep, that's for me. That is a truly wide gate understanding of spirituality.
Yeah, and it's timeless. And so tell me, I know that you spent a period of time, let's say, immersed in monkhood, and how long was that chapter for you, and how was that then a transition for you to move into, I guess, more of the work you're doing today in terms of like yoga teaching and teaching teachers and so forth? Like how did that transition come about?
Well, I was a monk for about 6.5 years. And, the entire time I got into yoga before I was a monk. I got into yoga when I was still doing hardcore music and as a teenager. Not because I wanted to do a handstand, but because I really wanted to understand these spiritual truths taught in India. All the handstand stuff that I do, or, teach a handstand workshop or a backbend workshop, that's all what's the word? Ancillary things that I've learned on a path, taking care of your body, right? Because the body's the temple. So you want to maintain your body. But yoga can easily shift, or anything physical can shift, or anything that has some self-worth in it can shift. Like, for example, if I don't do anything physical and then I go jogging every day, I feel good about myself. And you get a little self-worth when you take care of yourself. But then quickly that can turn into ego. Why aren't you jogging? What are you doing with your life? You're so out of shape. So we got to be careful when we do things. We got to understand the reason behind everything. So physical yoga, especially the styles I taught, which were advanced asanas, was very often it can very easily become part of your ego, which is the very opposite of what yoga is. We have so many yoga celebrities on Instagram. And here's a picture of me meditating. Here's a picture of me. Once you take a picture of yourself meditating, you're no longer meditating. But, I get it. It's their business. But my point was, I lost my point. What was your question again?
Well, I was going to say, I was just thinking of your transition into yoga teaching, and even my experience with you, like doing when you came to Australia. That was, I think, 11, 12, maybe even 13 years ago, and practicing with you.
Really?
And yeah, I mean, yes, I have a photo on my Instagram. If you go way back down the feed, wow. There's a photo with us together in Sydney. And but that's one thing I really enjoyed about your class. It's this beautiful hybrid of the relevance of sort of modern, innovative physical yoga that we need. It's important for the body, and yet it was so like, just the way you transmitted that and conveyed it and shared the practical aspects of the teaching. Yeah, the deeper essence was so very naturally and effortlessly woven through. It was, whereas I think today there's so much of it just sprinkled here, or a philosophical quote there. It's not quite coming through lived experience when people are presenting and teaching this modern kind of constructs.
That's the nicest thing you could say to me. Thank you, Amy.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's true.
I think having that background in the ashram and studying for all those years really helped me integrate it. You know what else was, and this is a strange twist, and it's all in my book, is while in the ashram, I started another band with all monks, and that band was called Shelter. And this band got bigger than the first band, and we were the first celibate rock and roll band in the history of the world, I think. But to try to convey spiritual teachings, esoteric spiritual teachings, to a punk hardcore audience was a real task, because it's not a yoga studio. Yoga studio is like, yeah, I have a Ganesh t-shirt and it's yoga. It's sort of like, signed up for this, tell me who Ganesh is. But in a punk, we're dealing with like anarchists, or just like a violent thug, or some communists, or all different types of theories and philosophies. And people are just like, yeah, religion doesn't belong in this music scene. So I had to learn how to debate every different angle, which really sharpened my study and made my study more intense, because I was convinced that and I still am, that everybody's a spiritual being. And therefore it's a spiritual thirst and a spiritual hunger that everybody has. And we're going to fulfill it with so many different things. We fulfill it with travel, adventure travel, sports, romance, whatever it is. We fill it up, personal goals, whatever it is, we fill it up. But it's actually a spiritual hunger. And it's the spiritual hunger that needs to be fed more than your body needs to be fed. So I felt, when I was transitioning out of that band and then going into the world, I thought, maybe I should just teach yoga. I've always done yoga for years. And I also was, a very physical person. I did Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I did advanced yoga. And I realized, like, there is like a demographic of people out there who are into sort of, longevity and, refined exercise and stuff like that. And I felt like, well, I hold my own with all that stuff. I do pranayama. I do, I felt like I was sort of like on the cutting edge of a lot of that stuff before a lot of people were doing it. And therefore there was such when I moved back to New York City, I became a very big teacher very quick in 2009, I think, 2008. And, all my classes were packed, and people weren't teaching handstands and inversions and tricky transitions and things like that. But my real heart was like, and I'm okay to give that. I'll teach people pranayama. I'll teach people how to do a handstand. This well goes very, very deep. But if they want more, I felt like I can give them that, because my foundation is in that. My foundation is how to reconnect the jiva, the spirit, with divinity, with Bhagavan. And that is the essence of yoga teachings. How to reconnect the jiva. The jiva is just trying to connect with the jiva. The soul is trying to desperately fall in love. Desperately, pathetically sometimes trying to fall in love. I think it's safe to say we have all probably pathetically fell in love, even when we knew it wasn't good for us. But actually that love, that heartfelt love, no man or no woman can even accept all the love that you have to give, because we are meant to love bigger than beings of this earth. Beings of this earth, that's a small L love. You will love your spouse. You will love your dog. You will love your family. You will love your nation. You'll love other things. The closest thing you can get to a big L love, you're experiencing right now. It's love from a mother to a child. That's the closest thing. But the real capital L love, that's actually an eternal love, that's the jiva, or the soul's love for divinity. And that has to be reawakened. And that's what the yoga process is. It's a remembering of what we forgot. And how do we forget it? Lifetimes of falling in love with the material world and getting your heart broken. Because that's what the material world specializes in. A pruning process. Just prunes us.
Totally.
Ever feel pruned by the material world?
Constantly. But, you know, like, this is probably a really good segue. I was going to ask you, well, and you mentioned the body being a temple earlier, and I can relate to that concept, but I also think of yoga as being like a temple complex as well. You know, some people, they step through the doors or the gateway, they look at the intricate ornamental, you know, carvings, they get distracted, take a few photos, take their shoes off maybe, and then they leave. But very few people, you know, take themselves into that inner sanctum of the temple that is yoga. And so that brings me to Bhakti Yoga. And I saw a clip that you shared on Instagram not too long ago, which is, I think, a snippet from your podcast, the Wisdom of the Sages podcast, where you mentioned the secret chamber, which I loved. And so depending on a person's experience and their life, they may see Bhakti Yoga as being, you know, synonymous with the Hare Krishna community, which is obviously very much part of the Vaishnava tradition, but others may not have that connection and not really have clarity on what the essence of Bhakti Yoga is, and particularly in a practical sense, like the practicalities, how that is lived and how we bring that bhav or that mood into daily life. So can you elaborate on Bhakti Yoga a little bit?
Sure. Bhakti, and this is sort of what I like about Bhakti, because it teaches all the different ways to understand divinity. And certain people within the Vedic paradigm understand God as light, as energy. And that's true. In the same way, at a distance, I might see a train coming. And what is that train? It's actually a light. It appears like a light in the distance. But as that train comes closer, then I see, oh, actually, no, that's not light. That's actually a long string of cars coming on a track. And as that train pulls into the station, oh, there are beings on that train. So our vision gets more and more refined. So one way, the Bhagavat Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the major book that we study in Bhakti Yoga, and that's what our podcast is built upon. We go through the entire 18,000 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is considered the cream of all Vedic teachings. So it explains how that's one way to see spirituality, is that everything is light, and we are beings of light, and everything is spirit, and we are connected to everything, and God is formless. And then another way to understand God is that God is, just like you are an Atma or a soul, there is a Param Atma, a supreme soul that is within every living being. A tree, a cheetah, a dog, a goat, a cat, a blade of grass, and a human. We all have this spark of God, and then we have the Param Atma, or the supreme soul, which is non-different than God within everybody. And some yogis meditate on that as their object of meditation, the Paramatma. And then and there's different processes for each path. And then of course in Bhakti, God has form. The idea that God actually has form. And there's different types of form or avatars of Vishnu we worship. But the one in our particular lineage that we're fond of is Krishna. And Krishna is like the charming cowherd boy with his gopi or cowherd girl Radha, and that's our meditation. Is one right and the other one's wrong? No, they're different ways of like, just like I'm going to call you Amy. That means, you know why? Because your name's Amy. But your mother could call you darling, or your husband could call you darling. Does that mean you're not their darling? Yeah, they love you in a different way than I love you. And your children will call you mama, and they'll love you in a different way than your husband loves you and your mother loves you. So you manifest a different facet of your beingness to different living beings, right? And so God also, according to the proclivity in each of the jiva's heart, meaning we're the jivas, jiva or atma, just the way to say the soul. I know you know this, but maybe not all your listeners know this. So according to the proclivity that each of us have, God will manifest in this impersonal form, or this paramatma, this localized form, or this personal form as Krishna or Rama or Narasingha or Lord Vishnu, etc. So it really depends on how you want God to manifest to you, and it really depends on who your teachers are, and because generally your teachers will come through a particular lineage in this tradition, and it's not just sort of like, well, I think it's going to be like this. It's not like that. It's our teachers have passed down a lineage of truth, almost like an electric current, just like if you were to put your hand in an electric socket with a knife. If you were to grab my hand, I'd get electrified. And I touch my dog gets electrified. So there's a current coming. And in the same way, we get that current from being connected to a bona fide source of spiritual teachings. It's not left to just one insightful person's speculation on how we should understand God, which oftentimes you find a lot of that in Western teachings. In India, they're very, very careful. Even if you study any of the Vedic sciences, dance, which I know you study dance, or music, you need to hear from a teacher, and the teacher is going to teach, or Ayurvedic medicine. It's passed down from teacher to disciple, what to speak of the sacred science of the self. It's the same. I don't know if I got off track there. I tend to.
No, well, that's just the common thread. No, I guess I was just trying to convey that the essence of bhakti, which you have so beautifully, but also, I guess, the practicalities. How is that lived in daily life? When people say, that's my path. Obviously, meditation, puja, japa, kirtan, yatra, pilgrimage, all of these.
Matter of fact, it's actually very, very bhakti is a very, very practical path. Of course, there's bhakti. Bhakti means, how can I enjoy my senses in this world? When a person gets fed up with bhakti, and I think, especially growing up in the West, we're like, you know what? Been there, done that, over it. We want something higher. I want something higher that can't come from my sensual experience. I've eaten everything, I've had sex with everything, and I've been, I've been to the nicest beaches, whatever it is. What's next? Do you ever get to that point? Like, now what? So when you get to that phase, when you're exhausted with material life, there's got to be something more. So the next stage is, from bhakti, I want some mukti. I want some freedom from the pain. Why? Because bhakti has a beginning and an end. It's great, and then it's over. And I got to get it again, and then it's over again. And so that's like the roller coaster of material pleasure. You get it, and then you lose it, and then you got to dress it up and get it higher. And people do this with drugs. Okay, I take 1 dose of acid. Now I want 2 doses. That 3 doses, because I can't keep that 1 dose. People always up the ante in material life so they can get that high even higher. But it ends up burning themselves out, whether it's with anything. And as we get older, we can enjoy less in the material world. I'm 57 this year. I can't eat as much as I can. And if I do, you know it. My ex-wife used to say, "Oh, you've been eating bagels, haven't you? You're starting to look like a bagel."
Well, look, in terms of scriptural study, and you mentioned the Srimad Bhagavatam, but what about, obviously, I guess, a more, let's say, mainstream text across yoga traditions would be the Bhagavad Gita. And I know that when I first read it, I didn't really get it. I just read it as a fictional story. It was dry. And then once I actually studied it with a teacher, it was profoundly different. And one of the, I guess, secrets or clues that helped me really have quite a transformative experience reading the Bhagavad Gita was to imagine that all of the characters, everybody in the Gita, Arjuna, Krishna, the family, everyone on the battlefield, that it was all me. It was all elements of myself and conversations with myself. And that may not be a teaching that everybody teaches, of course, but that helped it really land for me and to assimilate the teachings a lot more differently. So for you, like, what would you say is a secret to the Gita, to the Bhagavad Gita, to digesting and really understanding its teachings?
Well, like yourself, I found it very heady and hard to get through from the very first verse. But when I read the Mahabharata, see, the Gita, as you know, is just one small chapter of the Mahabharata, which is the biggest epic in the world that's 13 times bigger than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. We're so proud of our Western literature. And, we put it up on this pedestal, and they are great works, but the Mahabharata is the biggest epic of all time. It's 100,000 Sanskrit couplets. And so the Bhagavad Gita is one thin chapter, but it's the most commented by all the great sages of India because it speaks about essential truths, and it deals with yogis from all different karma yogis, jnana yogis, and bhakti yogis. And you'll understand the dialogue in perspective. Why? Because it's Arjuna. And the whole Mahabharata deals with who is this character of Arjuna. Every child in India wants to grow up. My kids, when they grew up, they wanted to be Arjuna. Why didn't you name me Arjuna? Because Arjuna's the hero. He's like the best archer. He's incredibly brave. He's having a panic attack on the battlefield. He's like the best warrior. He has mystical weapons. He's like all these Marvel movies it's like better than any Marvel movie. He has mystical weapons given to him by the gods, and he's having a mental breakdown on the battlefield. And he turns to Krishna, who's his good friend. Now, who is Krishna? The interesting thing in the Mahabharata is all the people that you fall in love with. Just like when you read any novel, there's people that, I love this person, and there's people you can't stand. All the people that you fall in love with, they don't just see Krishna as this young prince. They see him as Lord Vishnu. They see him as the origin of everything. He's God incarnate onto earth, and he had these silly, funny little pastimes as a child, and now he's got this whole thing where he's a prince of Dwarka. And so he's acting in an incredibly humble way by saying, you know what, Arjuna, I love you so much. I'm going to drive this chariot for you, which is a very lowly position to be the chariot driver. It's like being a chauffeur. And so here is the supreme personality of Godhead incarnate is going to say, Arjuna, I love you so much. I'm going to be your driver. And so he's Krishna's, Krishna and Arjuna have this friendly relationship. So Krishna, who does all these funny, naughty things throughout his whole life in the history of the Mahabharata, and Arjuna, this brave superhero, is having a meltdown. He brings all his woes to Krishna. And you're so eager. What is Krishna going to say? What will Krishna say now? And what is Arjuna going through? And so at that point, you are so eager to hear that dialogue that the whole thing makes sense. Mm. So that's a great context. I highly recommend Mahabharata, spelled Mahabharata. The version I like that is still pretty long, and I think you should get a long version because it makes you fall in love with the characters and makes you sort of despise some of the other characters. But the version I really like is Krishna Dharma. That's the author's name. And you can also get on Audible if you don't like to read, or if you like to bike ride or jog or something, you can listen to it. I will say it's not a boring book. It's gripping. Even children like it. My kids would listen to it on the way to school every day. They'd ask me, can we put on the Mahabharata? It's great because it teaches ethics and morality and makes you fall in love with heroes. It's got mystics. It's got transcendentalists. It's got people who embody, envy and revenge and lust. And it like any good epic, it is calling out these archetypes, and it's for a child and for an adult. I think it helps us distinguish good from evil and all the nuances in between. Actually, when you read the life of Karna, is he good or is he bad? And you fall in love and you cry for Karna in the Mahabharata. Have you read?
I have not the whole thing.
Oh my God, you're gonna thank me in a few months because the Krishna Dharma's version is 800 pages, I think.
You should see my book list.
It is the best read, but it is the best read you will ever read. Or just get it on Audible because it is so good, and it'll give you a whole new perspective. And the whole thing's peppered with Vedic philosophy.
Well, the good thing is like our eldest child, who's 6, he's at that age now where I'm very mindful that I really want to start to introduce all this stuff to him, because he's so open to it and so ready for it, and at a great age to
You know,
introduce.
you know what? Get him hooked on Amar Chitra Katha.
Yes, I know. I've been meaning to order them. Like,
Oh my
yeah, one of the
God.
boxes.
You can get the
Yes,
Mahabharat. You can get the
I
Mahabharat
know.
Amar Chitra Katha.
Yes, it's
My
on the.
son is my 9-year-old is really into him right now. Because they're all, if you're, for those who don't know, all the Puranic stories they've had for literally decades, many decades, in comic book form, and they're all great. They are all really good. So you get the Mahabharata, you get the Ramayana, you get gods and goddesses. They're all over my house. My kids all grew up with them, and they know. My kids learn every detail of the pastimes, and you can quiz them, and you can quiz them. They can quiz you. No, Dad, you're wrong. Sometimes I'll give a class to my students. My kid will correct me. No, no, Dad, that didn't happen like that. It went like this, and because they're kids and they retain all this stuff.
Oh yeah, especially because it's through story form,
Yeah.
and I literally have the tab up on my computer to buy the
Oh,
comics.
really?
So it's
Buy
so
it.
on my radar, because I've been studying this year with Shantala Sriramaya, doing Vedic mantra, and she recommends it. So it's totally been on the list. And actually, you mentioned India, and so before you go, like I have a couple more quick questions for you. Speaking, you mentioned India, and it dawned on me another thing in preparing for our chat together, that it was 9 years ago, so 2014, that I was in touch with you, and I was going on my first trip to Vrindavan, and
Oh,
you
wow.
supported me in making sure that I was taken care of. I was traveling there solo, and had the most amazing time. And I normally don't really share this very much, because it feels like such a cherished private memory, and one that a lot of people wouldn't understand. But I went bathing in Radhakund, and I
Mm.
had the most profoundly mystical, like wild experience in that moment. And it was just one of those real experiences, driving home how potent it is to be in India. And I know you take groups to India. So I'd love for you just to briefly, succinctly, like touch on, yes, it's not essential to go there if you're a yoga teacher or a student, but like, what do you think in all the years that you've spent in India, that it
I
is,
think
why should you be
I think
there?
it's essential to go there. I think it's essential to understand yoga culture and
Cultural
and
context.
the spiritual culture of India, the context of it, but also what you experienced is there's 5 potent items of bhakti, and one of them is the dham. It's where we get this English word domicile, like a home, because they say this. And it's interesting to think of, like, where is your home? And according to the yogis, our home is not of this world, but they say that there is like a vortex in this holy places where you're entering a geography that's not of this world. So to bathe at Radhakund like you did is you're not in this world anymore. And if you go into it with the right attitude, you actually can experience for a moment what it's like to be a Paramahamsa, a pure liberated soul. So there's five potent items of bhakti, and we try to, when we're on pilgrimage, we engage in all of them in hopes that we are ready. And it happens where people like yourself, they just said, you know what, I'm new to, not you, but just some person be like, I'm new to all this, but I've never felt this way ever in my life. It's got nothing to do with it. It was a perfect sunset. It was a white sand beach. It was a Himalayan peak. It's nothing external. As a matter of fact, it's not like Radhakund is like, for a person, they'll be like, well, it's just like a dusty village. Big deal. It is a big deal, but you can't perceive it with your blunt senses. It's something more subtle is happening. So I like to take people to holy places, to holy rivers, to holy temples, meet holy people. Why? Because that's what transformed my heart when I was 22 years old and I packed it up and went to India. Is I felt like this is changing me and the whole world doesn't know about it. It's like top secret stuff. It's like a secret chamber in a
Mm.
house that you never knew was there. In this whole great wide earth, there's a secret little place where you can actually get spiritually surcharged. but you have to have the proper mentality, and you have to be handheld through teachings or a teacher, and they teach you how to behave, how to think, what to say, what not to say, where to go, what not to do. Because a lot of times we bring our bad habits to holy places, and it creates problems, and we get purified, and purification can come in the form of, you bug out in one of these places. I've seen people come and they immediately go, I have to leave. It's like shocking. They're like, I have to leave. And you could just tell they weren't prepared with with an appropriate teacher and a proper meditation, or they're just bringing some very dark baggage to a holy place. So we go through holy places. I change it up every year. This year we have an incredible trip. We start in Varanasi. Then we go to Udaipur, Nathdwar, Rishikesh, Haridwar, and Vrindavan. And it's just all holy places. And it's mind-blowing. And it's so transformational. This is the pilgrimage we do every autumn time. This is happening. Yeah. It's on my website, raghunath.yoga, and it's almost sell out. It sells out every year. And then in January, we do a training. We do a teacher training. It's a 300-hour Bhakti cultural immersion, where it's like a yoga training. You learn all the basics of how to sequence a class and, pranayam and advanced asanas. But we also teach everything from practical, relevant yoga philosophy, how to add kirtan to your class, how to chant with a harmonium in your class, Vedic rituals, simple rituals, setting up an altar, putting on tilak, things like that.
They're having that cultural experience too, which is really important.
Well, it's at Radhanath Swami's ashram in this beautiful, pristine country setting, and having the ashramites take care of us as guests. And I tell you, the kirtan there, it's a mind-blowing, life-changing experience. And I'm not just selling you snake oil. It's really special.
I believe it. Yeah. I literally actually just recommended probably 2 weeks ago someone to your trainings, because a lot of people do come to me knowing that I've traveled to India a lot and asking me, I want to do a teacher training and I want to do it in India. And I firmly emphasize that, well, you know what, the misrepresentation, the commodification of yoga is alive and well in India as well. And you have to be very careful.
It's worse.
Yeah.
It's worse in India.
Yeah. That's where the snake oil is, and so you have to be careful. And so
or it's impractical, because people don't realize it, but what we know as Western yoga is a very, very thin slice of a very big pie. So if you're expecting to learn that there, generally it's not going to happen. Generally, you learn the really interesting stuff. These kriyas, how to, run string up your threads of string through your nose, dauti and vomiting and, swallowing gauze and stuff like that, which are all interesting things. But if you walk into a Los Angeles yoga studio and say, okay, now we're all going to swallow gauze, we're like, what? When are we doing power yoga? I thought we were.
Yeah.
So there is something. It doesn't translate if you want to be a yoga teacher in America. I really feel like we run the wealth, you get the both best of both worlds, and it's explained in a very, very practical way from people who live it and love it and love to give it.
Yeah.
And we also have a kirtan camp that goes on, a kirtan training. If you want to learn harmonium, how to lead kirtan on harmonium, that goes on for 2 weeks. And then our podcast does a Wisdom of the Sages philosophy study. And that's for 2 weeks too.
Awesome. I have one more question for you, if that's okay.
Sure. All available on raghunath.yoga, RAGHUNATH.yoga, or follow me on Instagram, Raghunath, RAGHUNATH yogi, YOGI.
Perfect. Perfect. So as a father, I'd love to know, after all your years of practice and dedication on this path, what has been profoundly pivotal for you to understand or learn as a parent? But even if you want more specifically in that male role as a father, What's the biggest teaching, the biggest takeaway for you?
Takeaway for me as a parent.
Biggest lesson.
I think it's a delicate art of giving tons of love and still being detached, still understanding they're not your children. And that's a hard thing to do, because sometimes the kids come out, they look like you, they talk like you, they want to be like you, but they're not you. And they have their own path and their own journey. And as much as you want to give them everything that you hold valuable, sometimes we feel like we failed if they don't turn out the way we wanted them to. So you got to let go of a little bit of expectations. Sometimes you might think you have a watermelon seed and you actually have a cantaloupe seed. And no matter how much I try to make that cantaloupe turn into a watermelon, it's just not going to happen. So we can love them and we can give them as much as we love and what we know is to be truthful and a good way to live. But ultimately, they're their own beings and they have their own relationship with their higher power. And we have to just appreciate that. Mm-hmm. Love, but we can't be too attached. That's hard.
It is, absolutely. And as you said, it's the greatest love, that you can tangibly experience.
It's the greatest small L love.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this world, it is. But we can't keep it. How many times have our children or ourselves, just walked away from our parents after they gave us so much, did backflips for us, jumped through so many hoops for our benefit, taken us to Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and soccer and baseball, and sat in the car while we did that. And we're just like, F you, I'm out of here. How many, people do it. It's like, we can't, and it's like the most hardest thing for a parent who's given everything to the child, and the child biologically has to find themselves. Biologically, they're driven to find themselves, and sometimes they just go through this thing where they biologically have to just turn their parents off. And for a parent, it can feel like the biggest betrayal ever.
Lots to look forward to.
Good morning, everybody.
I will let you go, Raghunath, because I know it's late where you are and you get up early for your podcast in the mornings. But it's a real honor to have you, and deepest thanks for your time, and particularly for, your dedication to the path, to your teaching, to the community. Your contribution is obviously incredibly evident. I cannot wait to read your book. I'm tremendously grateful to you and for you. So we'd love you to come back to Australia sometime too.
Let's stay connected. If I don't go to Australia, let's meet in India sometime.
Oh yeah, even better. That's a good idea. That's a great idea.
Love to those kitties.
Thank you. Take care. All the best.
Keep up all the sincere study you do. It's very impressive, and all your students will get great benefit from everything you're doing.
I really appreciate that very much. Very much. Ram Ram.
Ram Ram.
Bye.
Jai Shri Ram.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.